Hello students, how are you all? Well, in our previous class, we had discussed about the central nervous system, and in central nervous system we had discussed about the brain and the spinal cord, and the cross section of spinal cord is given here. Now, next topic is peripheral nervous system. You know that all the nerves of the body together make up the peripheral nervous system. They are They all enter or leave the central nervous system. You know that those nerves which arises from the brain are called the cranial nerves, and those nerves which are arises from the spinal cord, that is called the spinal nerves. So there are 12 pairs of cranial nerves and 31 pairs of spinal nerves. Now first is cranial nerves. So cranial nerves arises from the brain and it is spread throughout the head. They also carry both sensory and motor neurons. Whereas in spinal nerves, these spinal nerves arises from the spinal cord along most of the length of spinal cord and spread throughout the body except the head. Now second is autonomic nervous system. So in autonomic nervous system, it consists of nerves, fibers and mass of nervous tissue, and that mass of nervous tissue is called the ganglia, and that ganglia they are located on either side of backbone. That ganglia are located on either side of backbone. These controls the involuntary actions of the internal organs of the body. The involuntary actions that takes place due to external or internal stimuli are termed as reflex action. The autonomic nervous system has two parts. First is sympathetic nervous system and second is parasympathetic nervous system. The first, parasympathetic nervous system and sympathetic nervous system. At first we will study about the sympathetic nervous system. It is sympathetic nervous system. It is often called the fight or flight division. It results in increased alertness and metabolic activity to prepare the body for an emergency situation, which this is sympathetic nervous system. And this sympathetic nervous system, it regulates responses during physical activities or emotional stress such as increased heart rate, dry mouth, cold skin and body supply to the blood to the arteries. Okay, that means in parasympathetic nervous system, the second is parasympathetic nervous system. This is also called the PNS, and it is called the rest and digest division. Parasympathetic nervous system is called the rest and digest division. It conserve and restore body energies during the rest or during the time when we take meals. Now the main nerves involved in parasympathetic nervous system, that are vagus nerves and pelvis nerves. Now the figure given here that shows about the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Here the figure is given that shows the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. Now the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, that is given here. Parasympathetic nervous system, that is here, and you are seeing here different parts of the body and parasympathetic nervous system. Now some important terms related to nervous system that are given here. See here, first is stimulus. So what is stimulus? This means the change that happens outside the body in the environment and which causes the change in the body, that is called the stimulus. For example, heated cooker. When you touch the heated cooker, you just burns at that time, you feel hot and you quickly pick up your hand. So that hot cooker is acts as the stimulus. Now receptors, it is that sensory organs in the body which receives the stimulus. Those receptors receives the stimulus. For example, on touching the heated cooker, the nerve cells in the skin will receive the stimulus and is called the receptors. Okay. Now impulse, it is the sudden electrical disturbance which runs through the nerves. So impulse is the sudden electrical disturbance which runs through the nerves. For example, on touching the heated cooker, the sensation that runs through the nerves is called the impulse. And then effectors. What is effectors? The muscles, glands are the body parts which receives the response from the brain for the action against the stimulus. That means when your hand touch any hot object, your brain give the order to the hand to replace from that place. So that part of the hand which touches the hard part, that is called the effector. Now response. The response is the change in the body due to the stimulus. For example, the jerking away of hands from the hot cooker is the response. That means when response, what response will you do after the touching the hot cooker? You will remove your hand. This is called the response. Now next is reflex action. Next heading is reflex action. You know, it is a quick action. So the simplest form of response in the nervous system is called the reflex action. This is the rapid automatic response to the stimulus which is not under the voluntary control of the brain. It is a rapid automatic response to a stimulus which is not under the voluntary control of the brain. It is described as an involuntary action. So reflex action is an involuntary action. Thus a reflex action is one which we perform automatically. It is a comparatively simple from the behavior in which same stimulus produces the same response every time. If we unknowingly touch a hot plate, we immediately move our hand away from it. So moving our hand away on touching, this is an example of reflex action. Now the pathway of reflex action, that means what routes are there in the reflex action. So that pathway of reflex action, there are the pathway taken by the nerve impulse in reflex action is called the reflex arc. So that is the reflex arc. So reflex arc, the pathway taken by the nerve impulse in a reflex action, that is called the reflex arc. Now this reflex arc allow rapid response. We will explain that the meaning of a reflex arc by talking an example, that a reflex action is an automatic response to a stimulus. Okay. Now a reflex action is an automatic response to a stimulus. An example of the way in which we respond to a stimulus is our reaction to touching a hot object. Now we know that when we touch any hot object, quickly we remove our hands due to the reflex action. Okay. So here is a figure which represents the pathways taken by the nerve impulse in the reflex action. See here, this is the figure which shows how we reflex our hand. Here, this is a hot object. When your hand touch this hot object, the message moves to the spinal cord through the sensory nerves, and then the order which is released from there, that is transferred to the affected part by the motor nerves. So sensory nerves, it carry the message to the spinal cord, and then by the motor nerves, that order will come on the affected part, and quickly we remove our hands. Now this topic is completed, and you know that there are various examples of reflex action. In dim light, your eyes, there is a pupil, and that pupil is large. But when there is less light, your pupil is, the size of pupil is large. But when there is more light, the size of pupil is decreases at that time. It is also an example of reflex action, and this action is done automatically. You know, when a bright light shines into eyes, then the pupil of our eye automatically become smaller. Okay, now this is all about this chapter, and the question answers about this chapter you will do it with your notes. Thank you. That's all.